Sanders, David Russell. We're here to interview Sally Martyn today about her memories of Port Stanley way back when.
Way back when.
Yeah. So Sally, I think of you from Sparta, but I guess you spent your childhood summers in Port Stanley, eh?
Yes, we had a cottage in Port Stanley over on Orchard Beach, and that's where we were there from July 1st till Labor Day every year, and until I got up when I was old enough in university and working at the psychiatric hospital. Then I went from the 1st of May through till university started. Oh yes, I was eager to get down to the cottage.
Is that cottage still standing today?
The cottage still stands there. John Callahan owns it. It's on 232 Edward Street. So it's still there. It's been altered. It was stucco on the outside, and they've covered it with aluminum siding or vinyl or such. And yeah, it's very, it doesn't look much like the cottage. And the upstairs was 1 bedroom, 1 giant room with 3 beds. That was my room. And I could have all the friends I wanted over. And it had a balcony out the front and a window at the back. So I used to sleep out on the balcony in hot weather. Always just dragged a mattress out there and slept on the balcony. But they've got it now. It's I think 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and a dressing room and stuff up there.
And you had lots of family in that area too in the summers, eh? Tell us about that.
Okay, so right next door beside me was my Aunt Polly. Now that was my father's family cottage, and we lived in my mother's family cottage. And my Grandpa Nash gave that to my mother, and they bought another cottage further down, which is 242 Edward Street. So that's where Grandma Nash and Grandpa lived. Only my grandpa died when I was 3, so I don't have a lot of memories of Grandpa. But Grandma lived till I was in teachers college, actually. So I was finished university by the time Grandma died. So I have a lot of memories of Grandma anyway in that cottage. And then Aunt Polly was right next door. And then the Andersons were kitty corner to us. And Mary Anderson was my first cousin. Her mother and my father were brother and sister. And then I had the Baldwins up the street, 4 cottages, and that was my mother's sister and family. So I had both Smiths and Nashes, which were my families. They were all there, and then Uncle Chet was over on Kitchener Street.
And what do you remember? What did you do with yourself as a kid and as a young person in Port Stanley in the summers?
Okay, well, there was a lot of things that we did. And I will say our families organized a lot of sort of fun things for us to do. But I was the oddball in the whole group because I'm an early riser. Like I was always up at 7 and ready for bed at 10. And the rest all would sleep till 11. You know, teenagers, they all want to spend the whole day in bed, it seemed to me. And so I'd go for an early swim in the morning and I'd do all kinds of things. And then once they'd get up at 11, then I'd go and have fun with Betsy or Melody. The two I hung out with the most were Betsy Anderson and Melody Baldwin, were my 2 cousins, one on either side.
And did you spend a lot of time in the lake?
I spent a lot of time in the lake. I loved to swim, and we would swim. One of the things we did, my mother used to be a real swimmer at one time. She wasn't by the time I was around, but because my parents were older when I was born. Mother was 39 when I was born, and Dad was 46. So they were married after the war, late in life. They both lost their fiancés during the war. I used to swim down to the McManus Dock. That was about there and back was about a mile. So we thought that was a good swim. We would swim down there often, or we'd swim out to the lighthouse. But we'd get in trouble sometimes if we went out to the lighthouse because it isn't that. It was the village and the boats and stuff. They weren't too keen on having kids swimming out to the lighthouse. So we'd often swim to the little lighthouse that's on the other pier and climb up on the rocks there and have a rest and then swim back in. But it was not shallow then like it is now. It's very shallow due to the berm. Like the berm didn't exist in those days. So
when did the berm go in?
It went in the 70s. So, I mean, I was married in 1972, so I wasn't at the cottage anymore from then on. That was the hardest thing I ever remember is I was used to the cottage all summer, and I could go for a swim every night just before bed, so I was always nice and cool and sleep like a rock, etc. And then I had to spend the first summer we were married at the farm. It's a lot hotter at the the farm.
There are no cooling ponds.
No, there was nothing to cool off. I eventually put a pool in, but
But when you say McManus Dock, so that suggests there were things there then that aren't there anymore. Tell us a bit about that.
okay. So the McManuses down at their cottage, as you know, Joe McManus had a large cabin cruiser, and he had a like a boathouse, etc., in the harbor that is still there. And that's where he kept the boat, but then he would always drive it over to his dock at the end of by the cottage, and then he'd pick up all kinds of people and take them out for a ride. So many a times I had a ride on McManus's cabin cruiser. As kids, they were always taking us. Walter McManus was close to me in age. His brother and sister were older than I was, but Walter was my age. And I will say my dad knew Joe extremely well, and of course, Bessie was from Port Stanley, so that's why they had the cottage there.
Do you have remnants of those docks?
I don't think so. They're just down past Almavilla, and I don't think there's anything there at all now that I can tell. That was a long dock. I have lots of pictures of it. It went quite a way out into the lake so that, his full boat could pull in beside it and still be in deep water.
Yeah, I go by in my kayak and it's sure not there now.
No, there's nothing. I haven't seen anything in that area for a long time.
What about erosion in that area? Is it within your memory that a lot of it disappeared, or would that be from your parents telling you?
In front of our place, we never had any erosion because people put down rubble. At that time, it was sort of old basement, or barn groins and stuff all ground up and thrown over. That's what they had at that time. And I will say, my parents owned a lot further back, 3 cottages back, there was another lot. And my parents owned that, and Aunt Polly owned the other. There was another lot that they were an L shape. Anyway, the idea was that if the land ever got close enough, Polly could move back the cottage back that far, and we could move ours back to the other lot. But my parents eventually, when they sold, were going to move. When they lived there after we were married. They lived there in the summers and then lived in Florida in the winters and had a place in St. Thomas for the in-between time. And they sold the lot at that time. They figured they'd never need it, which they never have. The land is still, the front lawn on our old cottage is exactly the same as it was when I was a kid. Mm. But they've now got these big cement walls and berms there instead of the rubble. And my dad actually, the federal government had 3 groins there, and they were wooden pier-like things with 3 steps up, and they were to protect the area, and they did, because we all had beaches in front, and there's no beaches there now at all.
So the groins were in front of Edward Street out in the lake?
Yes, and the first one was right in front of where the old house that's gone now is. That was one, and there was one right in front of my grandmother's cottage, and then one further down, and those kept the land there, and we used to swim off those. That was, we didn't lie in the sand. We'd sit on the docks quite often. Now, I was not a sunbather. Sorry, I burned. I lived in the water. I didn't sunbathe. Everyone else did, and I was off swimming all the time. But no, those kept the land. Aunt Polly lost one year. I remember we had a storm, and Aunt Polly lost some land, and it came up to about 2 feet from the edge of her porch. And then my dad had more rubble put down in front and filled it back in again, so that she had her front lawn. But so that has remained. We've been lucky. Of course, the Gonders have that now, and they tore the old Smith cottage down eventually and built a new one, and they have the big cement walls down there too. So
you mentioned that your families organized a bunch of activities. Tell us about
Mary Anderson was an amazing she was that much older than I was. I mean, she had children older than I did, even though she was my first cousin. But she organized all kinds of things for the kids. So she had carnivals where we would all dress up in different costumes, etc. And she'd have games, like ring toss and all these different games, and there would be a bake table and a candy table and popcorn, and it was all to raise money for the Anglican Church in Port Stanley. And then so those happened several years. I have pictures I can show you. Even I didn't bring them with me, but of myself as a clown and as a soldier and different costumes. And then she also organized taffy pulls. So every summer she would have a taffy pull where she would make, cook taffy. And then as kids, we would all get together and we had to pull the taffy until it turned into, like humbug type things. And it was wonderful. We loved that. She also had a giant Lincoln car, and she would pack all of us in our pajamas and take us to the drive-in to see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or one of those. And we were all had to be ready for bed, though. So as soon as we came home, we went right to bed. But Mary was wonderful that way. They also organized, and I don't think Mary organized this. I think this was my Aunt Lorna, organized scavenger hunts. And they would give us all, we would form in teams, and then we'd have a list of things we had to find. And we had to bring it all to, and I think it was onto Mary Anderson's porch that we brought them. And one of the things I still remember always, and I knew right where to go for it, was we'd always get a 1940s or a 1930s magazine. But it wouldn't be just a 30s. It'd be a 1936 March or something like that. And the Miss Torreys, Louise and Jean Torrey, who lived 3 cottages down from us, they had every magazine from the 1910s on. And we always knew where to go. Some of the kids didn't know, but I knew where, and Jean and Louise always saved the magazine for me. So, no, the scavenger hunts were a lot of fun. And they would take us literally all over Orchard Beach. But more in the area of Kitchener, and Willow and Vimy Ridge and Edward and Oak and like all right in that area, not down toward the McManus and Alma Villa. We weren't encouraged to go down that far. But we did hike. Betsy and Archie and I used to hike up Little Creek all the time behind the mill and have picnics back in there. That was always a favorite.
That's Archie Campbell?
Archie Campbell, yeah. Yes, Archie and Betsy were very close friends always, and they had, yes, still are. And they had a cottage, the Campbells had a cottage over in Kitchener.
It's great that the kids were playing and doing things and being kept active and really building long-term friendships.
Oh, very much so. The summer was important to me as a kid because I got to see all my cousins and all these other friends that I didn't get to see the rest of the year because we lived on a farm. The rest of them were all city kids. But we lived on a farm, so that was unusual. The other thing was that my mother and Aunt Lorna taught us how to play Run Sheep Run, which was an interesting game. And you were on 2 teams, and you had to pick 3 colors. One meant you're safe, sneak home. One meant they're getting near, be really quiet and careful. And another one meant, run like blazes because they're almost at you, so you better go. The idea was the whole team had to get back to the home base before any member of the hunting team found you. It was like they were wolves hunting the sheep. And the one of us was the shepherd. So if I was the shepherd, I'd hide my team somewhere. And then once I'd hid the team and we'd worked out what colors, we'd give the other team a map and we'd put 4 dots on it. We knew the team had to be in one of those 4 spaces. But we'd always try to make it so it was going to be hard to, like that if you went, you try to encourage them to go one way when your team was the other in some way. But if what you would do is as they were looking, the other team all stayed together and they're looking for our team, they're hunting for them. And I would be yelling colors. Like if red meant run home, you're perfectly safe, they're a long way away. I'd be screaming, red, red. And they'd think, is it a warning or is it, and you'd always use colors that didn't make any sense. But it was always a challenge to see if you could get your whole flock of sheep back to the pasture before the wolves got them. And if they got them, then they got to be the sheep and you got to be the wolves. And we used to love to play that game. And our favorite hiding place was Miss Hawk lived on the corner of Vimy Ridge and Oak in that little triangle. And she had a huge rose arbor. Wooden rose arbor, but it was so overgrown there was only one little tiny crawl space you could get into the middle. And I was notorious for hiding my team in that spot because you couldn't see in there. And literally, but it was getting in and out was the fun part. It was they had to get out and get back to the Anderson cottage before the others figured out where they were. But
seems like your competitive spirit was honed quite early, Sally.
Very well, and I loved I had a really loud voice, so I often got to be the shepherd. because they could hear my voice throughout all of Orchard Beach, I'm afraid, probably.
And what about, you had family up in Hillcrest too, you got to know that area?
I didn't have family up there. We had close friends.
Yeah.
The Jennings and the Hammonds were both very close friends, and they lived up there in cottages where Dr. Hoffus is now. That was where the Hammond cottage was, and the Jennings was the one right beside it. And their dog, I still remember that Jack Jennings' dog, it was a great big black lab, and she would go swimming with us every day. And she would love to have you as a kid hold on to her back, and she'd swim you all over the place. She just loved to do that, and we just thought that was so neat. And she was actually the mother of my dog that I adored, that used to come to Port Stanley every day looking for me if I was away anywhere.
Used to come from
Sparta to Port Stanley every single day, visit my Aunt Polly. And Aunt Polly would feed and water Boots, and then Boots would run back to Sparta because he figured out I wasn't there.
That's a pretty long trip for a dog.
It is, and he did
Loyal
it
dog.
every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he was very loyal. I grew up, I was 5 when we got him, and I was 18 when he died. So, I mean, he was very much my dog. I broke my heart when he died right in the middle of exams in grade 12, and that was hard.
Do you remember the Hillcrest Inn? Did your family go there?
Oh, Aunt Polly always, like, my mother was always entertaining. And that was one thing that was fun at Orchard Beach. They were always having each other over for dinner. So we always were going somewhere for dinner. The only place I didn't like to go for dinner overly was the Andersons, because Mary insisted you put a dress on. You had to dress up for dinner. And there was a bell for the maid to come in and bring the food in and take the food out. And that wasn't the same. Betsy loved to come over to our place because it was just like family style. You put everything on the table and pass it around. She liked that. But Aunt Polly, she didn't like to cook for everybody. She had a great dining room, but she didn't like to cook. So every time it was her turn to entertain, she took us all to Hillcrest Inn. So I have many a memory of sitting in Hillcrest Inn and having dinner up there. And you had to dress for that one, but that was special. That was kind of neat to go to the inn.
A large dining room there?
Very large dining room, yes, with windows all along the south edge that looked out over the lake.
Oh, that'd be
So it was a beautiful spot to go for dinner. Yeah, we all liked the Hillcrest Inn. And my dad used to, like, he was part of the Kiwanis group here, and they met at the Hillcrest Inn.
Trying to remember when it burned down.
Yes, it did. And I'm thinking it was in the 60s that it burned. I'd have to look that up, but I think it was in the 60s when it burned. Because Stan Ship owned it at the time it burned, I know that. But I don't remember ever going there once I was married, so I assume it was in the 60s.
And it had rooms on the second floor then?
Yes, it did. And it had meeting rooms in the basement as well. So there was like a bar and meeting rooms in the basement with like a big fireplace both on the main floor and in the basement. And the basement had windows that opened toward the lake as well.
Must have been a very large building.
It was a large building. Yeah, it was a very long, 3-story high building. Yeah.
You must have known all the businesses in Port Stanley pretty well. First I want to say, what's the deal with soybean bread and Port Stanley?
Okay, well, the Bugs Bakery, the family who ran the bakery in Port Stanley were the Bugs. That was their last name. And we always thought that was really funny that it was Bugs Bakery. But they made soybean bread, and they were known all over this whole area for soybean bread. Nobody ever made soybean bread as good as theirs. They also were great for Chelsea buns. We all loved Chelsea buns when they had them. And they had baps, and it was the only place I ever knew you could get baps, like Scottish baps. They're a type of a bun that you cut in half and toast, and they're wonderful.
But I remember Lavax as being where we got the soybean bread. So did they follow the Bugs?
The Lavax was the name of the bakery.
Oh, okay.
The Bugs
Those were the
own.
people.
I think the Lavax built the bakery originally, but the Bugs were the people who actually did the baking. Yeah, and ran it. And
Where was that bakery? Do you know?
right near. Is it Apropos? Right in
Is
that.
that kind of where the pepper tree is now?
No, it was further down. The Pepper Tree was the Poodle Dog restaurant.
Oh, tell us about that one.
Oh, that was, if we had any money, if we'd managed to save up, we'd go over to the Poodle Dog for lunch.
And
That was a real
Did they
treat.
serve dog meat or no? What did you get? What did
It
you
was
get
just,
for
it was a
Poodle Dog?
pink restaurant with poodles all over it. I mean, it was kind of tacky, but we thought it was great when we were little kids. And the other thing I loved downtown was Elliott's drugstore. Because Elliott's, it's where the dentist is now, but that was the drugstore. Not that I ever went for drugs, but they had two things I loved. And one was they had a soda fountain. So you could go in and get a milkshake or a root beer soda, which was my favorite. And they also had comic books. They had a whole wall of comic books. They had magazines as well, but I was a real comic book collector. At one time, I probably had several hundred comic books. Wow. I gave them away. Should have kept them. They'd probably be worth a fortune now. But they were well read, let me tell you. I love that. And then next door to them was the Booker's grocery store. And Barry Booker and I were the same age. And Barry was always a sweetheart. And I really liked Barry, and we always got along well. And Rick was a character, his brother, who's still, and Rick's a wonderful guy now and so good to the people at the villa where he works. But at that time, he really hated cottagers. A lot of the people who lived in Port permanently did not like cottagers because they sort of came and sort of took over the village for the summer, and they didn't like that. So Rick had a gang that he would bully the cottager boys, not the girls. He never bothered the girls, but I don't remember anyone ever bothering the girls, but he was quite the character. In fact, when we were interviewing him for the job at the villa, and I was on the villa board, he just took one look at me and says, "Oh, well, I don't think I stand a chance on this one." I said, "Well, I think times have changed, Rick. We've all grown up."
So the parents would love the cottagers coming, not the kids.
Oh, yeah. No, it was just the kids resented, because it was their village, and all of a sudden all these other kids were there. And so, like, there was there were things for kids to do over on the main beach, and they didn't like the fact that, and some of us as cottagers probably had more money than they did. Now, I can't say we did as farmers, but a lot of my cousins certainly did. Yes, I had a spoiled cousin who had a Stingray car that he would brag that he'd drive. That was Bob Anderson. He would drive from the cottage over to the village and back and use a quarter tank of gas. He would give some people rides, and I said, "I don't want to ride in your car. It's wasting gas."
You mentioned the main beach. What did you go over there for?
They had a roller derby there, like a roller rink, and we used to go over and roller skate. They had trampolines, which I loved. Right in built, into the sand. They had pits under them and in the sand, and we thought the trampolines were wonderful. But when I was little, they had a merry-go-round, and we always rode the merry-go-round. And of course, Mackey's. You had to get Mackey's French fries from the booth. And their French fry sauce was not the same as the Mackey's today. It was fresh tomatoes and onions and peppers and all that, all chopped up together. But it was fresh, made fresh every day. It wasn't cooked. And we thought that was the most wonderful sauce. And their orangeade was wonderful. We seldom ate inside. We usually just bought French fries and an orangeade and ate out on the beach somewhere.
That's when Mackey's wasn't where it is now, but the separate little wooden buildings.
Yeah, the building, the Mackey's, the main restaurant part was at the west end of the boardwalk. And then right beside it, there was sort of an aisle between, and right beside it was the French fry booth. And then past that was Nemet's Ice Cream. And Nemet's, this was Bob Nemet's father, who used to live in Sparta, actually in Jamestown, but they sold and moved down here, and he had the old ice cream. Do you remember the cones that had little sections, and he'd put 3 scoops? So you could get 3 flavors of ice cream in Nemet's ice cream. So we always liked going over to Nemet's for ice cream. And the Stork Club. But the Stork Club was really winding down. It was more in my mother's. My mother went dancing there every Friday night from London, rode the LMPS over, and she loved to dance. But when we were kids, Friday night, there were teen dances on Friday night that we'd go over to. But I remember it more for like nurses' graduation. They would have a big banquet and dance there and things like that. But it wasn't thriving by the time I was a teenager.
It was such a large building to keep it full of people would be hard as things started to change. But
absolutely.
For special events,
for special events, and it was full because for the teen dances, you were lucky if you used a quarter of the floor. I mean, and it wasn't the same. And we weren't dancing to the big band era stuff except when they had the special events like a graduation or Western used to bring their Frosh Week. The students would come over to there. But yeah, and I rode the LNPS. I went to London a few times with my Aunt Lorna. She would take Melody and I shopping in London, and we'd ride the LNPS up.
So in those days, you could go all the way from Port Stanley. And where did it go to in London?
Right downtown, where the CPR station was. It went to the same spot. So it was right downtown.
How long a ride would that be on the train?
I can't say that I remember it being it was slow. It wasn't a fast train. It was an electric train. But we just thought it was, I was just a little kid and thought it was really neat because it closed in the 60s. And I mean, I think I was just in early high school when it closed. So, but it was probably a good hour ride.
People by then, in your memory, probably weren't using it as much to ride back and forth to St. Thomas or to London, just occasionally.
Yes, when we went, it was sort of because it was kind of a special trip that my aunt arranged for Melody and I to go over to London because she had a car. I mean, she could have driven us, but she took us on these trips every so often.
What about you mentioned way back with the events in Orchard Beach that you were raising money for the Anglican Church, and I think of you as United Church in Sparta, but now I hear you're Anglican in Port Stanley. Tell us about
I
that.
grew up in the Anglican Church. I actually attended the Baptist Church as a very small child in Sparta because it was across the street from our home. And then my father said, no, we're Anglican. I should take you down to the Anglican Church. So we went down to the Anglican Church and were quite active there when Rokeby Thomas was there and Morrison. And so I grew up with Beulah Dempsey and Ralph Glover and the Sidmores and Maureen McIver and all those people that went to there. And it was a very active church at that time. Rokeby Thomas was an amazing minister, lovely guy. He was Welsh and we really liked him. So, and I remember the organist well because the organist had served in the First World War. And he suffered from shell shock, which we now, of course, post-traumatic stress disorder. But at the time I was told shell shock because he would be playing away on the hymn and then all of a sudden he'd just stop. He'd freeze and he couldn't go on. But the choir knew and they just went on. Everybody just continued singing. And eventually he'd usually start playing again. But sometimes he never could start again during the service. But, it was a different experience as a kid. But we all understood. I remember my dad explaining to me that that's a problem he has, and we just do it. So no, the Anglican Church, and then when I was about 14, I started to go to a young people's group with the United Church and the Baptist Church in Sparta. And how I became United Church, I actually joined the Baptist Church eventually, and then we had a minister there who said that nobody in the United Church were Christians, and we had a joint community Sunday school. And you can probably edit this all out. So I just said, well, I'm sorry, but we have a joint Sunday school. And as far as I'm concerned, the people in the United Church are just as good as anyone else here. So we moved the Sunday school over to the United Church and I stayed there. So that's how I became part of Sparta United Church and then eventually Union. But my fond memories are of the Anglican Church when I was a kid.
Anything else you want to tell us about, Sally? Are there particular characters that you wanted to talk about or events in Port Stanley? I know you've got so many great memories.
Yeah, downtown, another thing that I remembered, there was a little diner where Glover Park is now. There was a diner and it was run by a little fellow from Romania. And he was always so kind. His family were still in Romania and he was trying to earn enough money to bring his family here. And he was so kind to we as kids. He was always giving us something, but we would sit and listen to him. He'd talk about his family and he just loved to have some kids there that would listen to him. And I remember him very distinctly. And there was a little store, there was the BA gas station on the corner. And right beside that was a little store, and I think it was called Brown's, but it's the one that sold all the candy, etc. I remember going in there. That's where you got your candy when you were a little kid. And then there was Dimmick's, and Dimmick's had yard goods. And
where was Dimmick's?
Dimmick's is where Art and Soul is now. And that was a a material store, and I was very much into sewing from the time I was in grade 7, and so I loved going to Dimick's and get various things as well. So
Did you keep a sewing machine down at the cottage?
no, at that time my mother had an old treadle machine which was at the farm, so I would just get things, but I would sew at the farm. It was when I was in grade 12, my mother traded in her treadle machine for a brand new Singer that even did zigzag and all those things, and that's still the machine I use from 1966, and it still works perfectly. It still does everything I need. Yeah, and I've never even had to have it serviced. I just clean it myself and oil it myself.
Wow.
It's a great machine. I wouldn't trade it for any of these modern ones for anything that are always breaking down because they're all computer driven. But yeah, no, as far as characters, I remember Ralph Glover extremely well too. Ralph was part of the Anglican Church, but the Glover family were very active in Port Stanley, and I remember Ralph as an older fella too. He used to come out and visit us at the farm at times as well. But and Joe McManus was quite the character, certainly in the village, and very much supported Port Stanley because Bessie, his wife, was from Port Stanley. So to him, Port Stanley was a very important place, and he gave all the kids. I remember my brother and my cousin Tom all worked at his stores in London. Like he had car dealerships and various things, and he always gave all the kids from Port a job. And Uncle Ben used to drive them over on his way to work in London and bring them back at the end of the day. So yeah, I don't know. I remember the Bostwick House well up on Hillcrest when I was a kid, because there were steps in front of the Bostwick House that came right down to the village. And we used to climb the hill off Edward. There were steps coming up Edward to Prospect. You'd cut across, because there were no houses through there, and you'd cut straight across and then go around the Bostwick House and down the steps to the village. And we thought that was a much better way than trying to go through Little Beach and around, because of the coal. The coal was always, it was really dirty. And the Little Beach was a dirty beach because of the coal.
We always called that beach the Coal Docks,
Yep.
even though now we call it Little Beach.
Yes, and when we were kids, it really was a little beach. When we were kids, it was a very small beach there. It's the berm that created the big beach. But
and that's the area that you were swimming in as well, though.
we were swimming, but further to the east.
Okay.
So right in front of our cottage is where we would swim. And the old road was still, the posts from the old road that went through from the village. It went through where Little Beach is and right straight through across in front of our old cottage. And the posts were still there because like Aunt Polly was quite the character who lived next door, and she would entertain the rest of us as kids. She loved to have the kids have us come and stay. And Betsy and I stayed there many a time because Polly would go down the 1st of May. So we thought it was great. We could go down on weekends and stuff and stay with Aunt Polly. And she taught us all to play Scrabble. I'm a really competitive Scrabble player, thanks to Aunt Polly. And we also, she always had a jigsaw puzzle on the dining room table. So rainy days, you knew to go to Aunt Polly's and play Scrabble or jigsaw, or Kings on the Corner was the card game she loved to play. But Betsy and I used to often stay there, and I can remember one night we'd be in the front bedroom, and Polly's bedroom was the one behind it, and we'd wait till we were sure she was asleep, and then we'd sneak out and go skinny dipping in the lake. And, I can remember I was 13 and Betsy was 11 because she was 2 years younger, and we're having more fun down there. It's midnight, and we're swimming away off this dock and stuff, and all of a sudden there are 2 men on the beach coming out onto this. They're coming down the beach, and I can hear these kids. I know there are kids down here. And Betsy gets out of the water. She's 11, grabs both our towels and runs up the stairs in front of Aunt Polly's cottage. And here are these men shining this flashlight on this little white bum going up the stairs. And they kept saying, "We know there's another one here." Another, "There's no way I'm getting out of the water."
You're hiding in the water.
I'm hiding in the water. And I swam really well underwater. Like, I could go underwater for 2 minutes without any problem. So what I would do is I'd go underwater and I'd swim way over out somewhere, and then I'd come up and take a breath or two, and then I'd go under and I'd swim to another location. They never did spot me. In fact, I finally swam right up back against the edge of the dock and would come up and get some air, and they kept saying, we know they have to, she has to swim over somewhere else or whatever. But they had been drinking clearly, and they were quite determined they were going to find me, and I was quite determined they weren't. And Betsy's lying up at the top of the hill, peeking over the hill, wondering what's happening. And anyway, when they finally left, I got out of the water and said, why did you take my towel? So anyway, Betsy and I used to skinny dip frequently. Even in the daytime, we'd hang our bathing suits on the poles where that old road was. There were metal, long bolt stud things sticking out, and we'd hang our bathing suits on those and just swim around because we liked to swim without bathing suits on. It felt great. And I still remember the one time we went to get our bathing suits, and Betsy lifted it off, and mine was there, but hers wasn't. And we were trying to figure out, what are we going to do? We dove down. We did everything we could to try and find this bathing suit, but it was quite deep there. And so anyway, I finally went in, and I grabbed a towel, and I brought the towel in, wrapped the towel around her wet, and she went up to the house with this. She got up to the beach, and then I put a dry towel around her, my towel, and she went up. And about a month later, her mother said, Betsy, I can't find your bathing suit with the balloons on. Do you know where you put it? Betsy said, no, I haven't a clue. We never washed up. We never found the bathing suit. But we decided after that we probably shouldn't be leaving our bathing suits hanging.
I'm curious what posts you're talking about for the road. What was that? Was it?
There was a road. There was a road there, and it's still technically, if you look at the municipal maps, you'll see the road allowance. It's still a road allowance through there.
The posts were for what reason?
I think they were bases for the road. To something to do with the base. I don't know. They were always there. They stuck up out of the water in front of the Anderson cottage. That's where they were. And my father, in front of our place, I said that we had the 3 groins, but he also he had an old railway car, a coal car, that when they used to have the steam engines and they would have this coal car that they had to feed the coal into the steam engine. He bought one of the old empty cars, and he put that down in front of our cottage, sticking out, and filled it with rubble. And that was to protect our area. So we kept a beach for us as well. And we could go down and fish every night, literally. Mother'd say, I feel like perch tonight. What do you think? Okay. And I'd go down, and in half an hour I'd have enough perch for supper. That's how prolific the perch were. And the dock where Dad had there that we had was quite deep there, so we could fish for perch.
That railway car is not there anymore.
No, it's long gone.
Did it wash away, or did it get removed?
I'm not sure. It was still there when I was married to John, so I don't know what happened, but it may have been removed. I'm not sure. There was an awful accident there. Bob Anderson used to have some pretty wild parties at the cottage. He'd have all his friends from Ridley College down, and of course they'd be drinking and such. And one of the guys went down there and dove off of it and hit his head on a stone and was paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of his life. So
it was quite high out of the water.
It stuck out of the water, a couple of 2-3 feet, not really high, but there were big rubble stones under the ground, and he didn't realize that.
And the water's murky, so...
Right, and it was also at night in the dark, and he just dove off. Had been drinking, and it's amazing that, I think there must have been some others with him. I don't remember, I remember the accident, but I don't remember seeing it. I just remember it was a pretty devastating time for that. But no, Bob was always having some pretty wild parties over at the cottage. Bob was very different from Katie and Betsy. They were all very unique characters, but Bob was the sort of the wild, spoiled boy, and I'm afraid he was. And whereas Katie and Betsy were very responsible, sensible people, and Bob wasn't.
Well, Sally, some sad memories and also some great ones.
Yeah,
we really appreciate you taking the time today to
you're
chat with us.
You're very welcome. Yeah,
we can do it again if you come up with things you want to talk about another time.
Well, there are lots of things like Moore Water Gardens. I remember. See, Montmore's wife, Isabel Keene, was one of my mother's closest friends. So they helped Montmoore set up Moore Water Gardens, and Isabel Keene's brother was my mother's fiance before the war, and then he suffered from post-traumatic stress or whatever. He ended up in the Veterans Hospital for the rest of his life. And But we always remained very close friends. And Sue and Blooch were good friends. And they always came to Orchard Beach. Like everybody, local people who knew swam at Orchard Beach. Only the visitors swam at Main Beach. Everybody else came over to Orchard Beach to swim because that was quiet and private and, it wasn't.
And there's no beach there now. So.
No beach at all. And that I find, those groins, I assume really made it. But they also, you see, the pier, the where the lighthouse is, that's what created the erosion over that way. And I do remember Hurricane Hazel. Now, that is one I do remember. And I do remember the erosion from Hurricane Hazel.
What time of year was Hurricane Hazel?
We were at the cottage.
Okay.
So that I know because my mother was terrified. Because my mother had been in a hurricane on the Atlantic Ocean going from Florida on a ship up to New York Harbor and had been in a hurricane and almost died. And so she was absolutely terrified of that storm. I remember that. And we always thought it was kind of funny as kids. It's just a storm, big storm.
That caused a lot of destruction.
A lot of destruction, yes. I was just a very small child. I wasn't very old because that was in the 50s.
What do you remember, though, about what it did in Stanley?
Oh, well, the in front of the Anderson cottage and down, toward, all the way down to Almaville, that whole area was devastated. And that's partly because of the pier. Where the pier is, it created this, like the lateral drift is from the west. So that's why Main Beach has built up over the years because of the pier. And then it came past the pier and then swirled in around and it would create this eddy. And that took away the land over on the other side. My mother remembered the orchards. Mm-hmm. Like she grew up when there were still orchards out there, and so did my dad. Because my dad, he was born in 1902, and his parents already had the cottage. Like the Smiths, where Aunt Polly lived, that was the Smith cottage, and then Grandpa owned the land all behind it. So he built our cottage where I grew up, and the three behind it, the LeSueurs and the Folkses and the Sandersons. They're all identical floor plans, and we have a cottage at the back of our farm in Sparta that's the exact same floor plan. It was called the Celery Farm because he grew celery. Grandpa grew celery back then.
So what was the floor plan?
The floor plan, sorry, it's the living room. It's virtually your floor plan. Yours is the same. The living room's in the middle. Bedrooms are on either side. Kitchen was at the back. And we had a set of stairs that went up, and there was one upstairs bedroom in ours. Some of them didn't have an upstairs bedroom, but they all had that same floor plan. And my parents took one of the bedrooms out and made that a dining room. And so that we only had 3 bedrooms downstairs and this dining room. And then the kitchen was just sort of a long, narrow thing all across the back. And I went virtually onto the road in those days. And had big windows. So you could always wash the dishes and you could see everything going on in the village, behind. And then they've shrunk all these little tiny windows and moved the sink. And I thought, oh, you silly people, that was wonderful. We love to be able to see everything going on. But, yep. Anyway, I could go on and on. Coal docks, cleaning, how awful it was with the coal. That was, cleaning the cottage when you first went in. We would always go down a week before we were going to move down, and we'd wash everything. And then we'd go down the next day and wash everything again. And we did it 4 or 5 times before you finally felt it was clean enough to go in. Because no matter what you do with the coal dust, the water gets gray and it leaves this gray film on everything.
That dust would be blowing all winter long.
All winter long. Every time there was a wind, especially when things were frozen, it would blow all the time. You could write your name on anything in the cottage. And we had, shutters. Like you didn't just close your cottage in those days. You put big shutters over every window. Drained all your water and always those fun things. Okay. But I loved the cottage. The cottage, I was really, my mother wanted to put a pool in and quit going to the cottage as we got older. And I said, no, I want to go to the cottage. I don't want a pool. I want to go to the cottage. I love seeing all my relatives and friends. And people dropped in all the time. Like even Mom and Dad's friends would drop in at 5 o'clock for a drink every day or whatever. And you'd see all these other neighbors all the time. And the LeSueurs who were right behind us, they were my favorite. Jean and Joe LeSueur and Louise and Joe LeSueur. And she was a great big woman. and he was this skinny little man, and they were the sweetest, nicest couple. And they had a glider on their front porch, and we all loved to sit on the glider. And so instead of a swing, we had a swing, but they had a glider. We thought gliders were really neat.
Great memories.
Oh, I have a lot of memories of Port Stanley.
Thanks so much, Sally.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate you doing it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Okay.
Thank you.